When 67-year-old James Anderson's stepchildren convinced a Virginia court that he was mentally incompetent and needed a guardian, it seemed like a routine elder abuse case. But Jim Anderson wasn't an ordinary retiree. He was a former CIA operations officer who had spent decades outmaneuvering foreign intelligence services. His stepfamily's $6.4 million guardianship fraud was about to face the full force of classified tradecraft. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. You'll want to hear every detail of this intelligence community justice story. James Anderson had spent 35 years serving his country in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged. From 1980 to 2015, he had worked as a CIA operations officer, running assets in Eastern Europe, coordinating intelligence gathering in hostile territories, and conducting covert operations that remained classified decades after their completion. Jim's official cover had always been State Department diplomatic security, a bland government job that explained his frequent travel and modest government salary without raising questions about his real activities. Even his family believed he was just another federal bureaucrat who had spent his career in unremarkable government service. When Jim retired in 2015 at age 59, his pension and benefits appeared consistent with a mid-level government employee. What wasn't visible was his substantial investment portfolio, funded by hazard pay, overseas allowances, and careful financial planning over 3 decades of high-risk service. Jim's total assets in 2024 were worth $6.4 million. His Alexandria, Virginia home valued at $1.8 million, investment accounts totaling $3.9 million, and $700,000 in government retirement benefits. His wealth was significant, but not obviously connected to anything more exciting than prudent financial management. Jim had married Patricia Torres in 2005, when he was 49 and she was 43. Patricia was a widow with 2 adult children from her first marriage, Michael Torres, then 24, and Jennifer Chen, née Torres, then 21. Jim had embraced his role as stepfather, helping both children through college and supporting them during early career struggles. Patricia died of cancer in 2019, leaving Jim as the sole heir to her modest estate and the only remaining family connection for Michael and Jennifer. The stepchildren maintained cordial relationships with Jim, visiting occasionally and including him in holiday celebrations. But Jim had never shared details about his real career with Patricia's children. They knew he had worked for the government and traveled frequently, but they assumed his work involved routine administrative duties rather than intelligence operations. This assumption would prove to be their critical miscalculation. By 2024, both Michael and Jennifer were facing serious financial problems that made Jim's $6.4 million estate an attractive target for desperate schemes. Michael Torres worked as a real estate agent in Northern Virginia, but the competitive market and economic uncertainty had reduced his income significantly. He owed $180,000 in credit card debt and was behind on his mortgage payments. His wife, Sarah, a licensed clinical social worker, supplemented their income but couldn't cover Michael's mounting obligations. Jennifer Chen had started a consulting business in 2020 that failed during the pandemic, leaving her with $220,000 in business debt and damaged credit. Her husband David had developed a gambling addiction that had cost them an additional $150,000 in losses over 2 years. Both stepchildren viewed Jim's wealth as their eventual inheritance, but at 67, Jim appeared healthy and could live for another 20 years. Their financial problems needed immediate solutions, not distant inheritance prospects. The solution they developed would exploit Jim's age and their insider knowledge of eldercare systems to steal his assets through legal guardianship fraud. The plan to have Jim declared mentally incompetent and place him under guardianship began during a family dinner at Michael's house in December 2023. The evening started as a typical holiday gathering, but financial stress and desperation would transform it into a criminal conspiracy planning session. Michael and Sarah's suburban Alexandria home reflected their mounting financial problems. The furniture was expensive. David's gambling problem cost us another $15,000 last month, Jennifer added bitterly. We're looking at bankruptcy if something doesn't change soon. Sarah poured wine for everyone, her clinical social worker training making her observant of the family's stress dynamics. We're all struggling while Jim sits on millions in that big house, barely spending any money. It doesn't seem fair. What do you mean, sits on millions? David asked. How much is Jim actually worth? Michael had been researching Jim's assets through public records and tax assessments. His house alone is worth at least $1.8 million. I've seen his investment statements when I visited. He's got accounts at 3 different firms. My guess is he's worth at least $6 million, maybe more. $6 million, Jennifer repeated. And we're drowning in debt while he hoards money like some kind of miser. The problem is he could live another 20 years, Sarah observed. He's in good health, lives alone, barely spends anything. We could be waiting decades for inheritance. David leaned forward, intrigued. What are you suggesting? Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. In my work, I see elderly clients all the time who seem fine on the surface but have significant cognitive decline. Sometimes families need to step in for their own protection. Jim seems perfectly sharp to me, Michael said. He manages his own affairs, travels, drives. I don't see any signs of mental problems. That's what's interesting about early-stage dementia, Sarah replied, her professional knowledge giving her credibility with the group. People can maintain a facade of competence while having significant underlying impairments. Family members are often the first to notice subtle changes. Sarah's clinical background had exposed her to numerous guardianship cases, and she understood the legal vulnerabilities that could be exploited in the system designed to protect elderly individuals. What exactly are you proposing? Jennifer asked, sensing the direction of Sarah's thoughts. Sarah looked around the table, ensuring she had everyone's attention. Guardianship. If we can demonstrate that Jim has Sarah's answer revealed her deep understanding of the guardianship system's vulnerabilities. That's the beauty of the process from our perspective. Once someone is alleged to be mentally incompetent, their ability to represent themselves effectively becomes questionable. Courts often appoint independent attorneys for alleged incompetent persons, but those lawyers are working within a system that assumes the petitioners have legitimate concerns. So even if Jim protests, the court might not take his objections seriously? Michael asked. Right. The court's primary concern is protecting someone who might not understand their own vulnerabilities. Jim's protest could be interpreted as lack of insight into his own condition. The 4 conspirators spent the next 3 hours developing their comprehensive strategy. Sarah would use her clinical social worker credentials to conduct unofficial assessments of Jim's cognitive function during family visits, documenting alleged signs of decline that would support their petition. Michael would begin visiting Jim more frequently, creating opportunities to witness and document concerning behavior that could be misinterpreted as cognitive impairment. Jennifer would research Jim's financial accounts and assets through family access, building a complete picture of the wealth they would gain control over through guardianship. David would handle the legal research and paperwork preparation, since his failed business ventures had given him experience with legal procedures and court filings. They agreed to spend several months building their case, creating a timeline of alleged cognitive decline that would be convincing to a court. They planned to file the guardianship petition in spring 2024, giving them time to document a pattern of concerning behavior. This has to look completely legitimate, Sarah emphasized. We're a loving family concerned about an elderly relative's welfare. Every interaction with Jim needs to support that narrative. What about the money? Jennifer asked. How quickly could we access his accounts once guardianship is established? Sarah had researched this aspect thoroughly. Guardian authority is usually immediate for routine expenses. Larger financial decisions might require court approval, but courts rarely question reasonable requests for the ward's care and support. Michael was already planning how to use guardianship authority. We could liquidate some of his investments to cover our debts. As long as we frame it as necessary for his care or appropriate financial management, the court wouldn't object. The evening ended with the 4 conspirators committed to their plan, confident that Jim's age and apparent isolation would make him an easy target for their sophisticated fraud scheme. None of them suspected that their target had spent 35 years detecting and neutralizing threats far more sophisticated than their amateur conspiracy, or that their planning session had already triggered the professional paranoia that would ultimately destroy them. Jim Anderson's CIA training had taught him to maintain situational awareness even in retirement, a skill that proved invaluable when his stepchildren's behavior began. Jim's intelligence training had taught him to pay attention not just to what people said, but to the underlying assumptions and objectives revealed by their questions. Michael seemed to be trying to establish that Jim was struggling with basic tasks, creating a foundation for some future argument about his capabilities. Jennifer's interactions became similarly probing, but her approach was more direct and systematic. During phone calls and visits, she asked detailed questions about Jim's finances, his daily schedule, and his social activities that felt more like debriefing sessions than family conversations. "Jim, are you still driving to the grocery store by yourself?" Jennifer asked during a phone call. "I worry about elderly people navigating traffic and managing shopping alone. Have you considered using grocery delivery services?" "I've been driving for 50 years without problems, Jennifer. Why would I stop now?" "I'm just concerned about safety. What about your banking? Are you still going to the branch in person, or have you set up online banking?" Jim was 67, in excellent health, and had never had driving problems or difficulty with routine errands. Jennifer's sudden concern about his capabilities seemed disproportionate to any actual issues, and her questions about his banking arrangements felt particularly suspicious. Most troubling was Sarah's behavior. As a clinical social worker, Sarah had always maintained professional boundaries in family settings, treating Jim as a stepfather-in-law rather than a client. But during recent visits, she had begun conducting what appeared to be informal cognitive assessments disguised as casual conversation. "Jim, what day is today?" Sarah would ask during dinner conversations, her tone casual but her attention focused on his response. "What did you have for breakfast this morning? Have you been taking your medications regularly?" These questions resembled the mental status examinations that social workers performed on elderly clients during competency evaluations. Jim recognized the techniques from his intelligence briefings on interrogation and assessment methods. "Why are you asking me these questions, Sarah?" Jim asked during one particularly obvious assessment session. "Oh, I'm not asking anything specific," Sarah replied quickly. "I just like to make sure you're taking care of yourself. It's natural for family to be concerned about health and wellness." But Jim's intelligence training had taught him to document unusual behavior and analyze patterns that might indicate hostile surveillance or preparation for an operation. He began keeping detailed notes about his stepchildren's changed behavior, including dates, times, specific questions asked, and behavioral observations. Jim's notes revealed a coordinated pattern. Michael was focused on establishing that Jim was struggling with household management and might need assistance with living arrangements. Jennifer was gathering information about Jim's financial management and daily routines, particularly his banking and investment activities. Sarah was conducting systematic cognitive assessments while trying to document potential mental health or memory issues. David was less active. The security cameras Jim installed captured extensive footage of his stepchildren entering his house without permission and conducting systematic searches of his personal documents and financial records. Michael had obtained a copy of Jim's house key during a previous visit and was using it to access the property when Jim was out. The cameras showed Michael photographing bank statements, investment documents, and personal papers that would be useful for understanding Jim's assets. Sarah accompanied Michael on several of these unauthorized visits, focusing specifically on medical records and prescription medications. The footage showed Sarah examining Jim's medicine cabinet and photographing prescription bottles, apparently looking for evidence of cognitive decline or mental health treatment. Jennifer and David joined the searches on multiple occasions, with Jennifer focusing on financial documents while David looked for legal papers including wills, insurance policies, and property deeds. But the most damaging footage showed Sarah conducting what appeared to be practice sessions for documenting Jim's alleged cognitive problems. The cameras captured Sarah coaching Michael and Jennifer on how to interpret normal behavior as evidence of mental incompetence. When he asks where he puts something, that's memory loss, Sarah explained to the others. When he takes time to make decisions, that's impaired judgment. When he's quiet during conversations, that's social withdrawal and possible depression. The footage revealed that Jim's stepchildren were systematically reframing his normal activities as symptoms of cognitive decline, building a false narrative to support their guardianship petition. Jim also discovered that Sarah had been accessing his medical records through her professional connections in the healthcare system. As a licensed social worker, Sarah had legitimate access to medical databases for her clients, but she was using that access to research Jim's health history without authorization. The security footage and Jim's analysis of their activities revealed a comprehensive plan to have him declared mentally incompetent so they could gain control of his $6.4 million estate through guardianship. But Jim's stepchildren had made a critical error. They had assumed Jim was just an ordinary retiree with no special skills or connections to protect himself. Jim Anderson decided it was time to remind them that underestimating a former CIA operative was a mistake with serious consequences. Jim's approach to neutralizing his stepchildren's guardianship fraud reflected his professional intelligence training: gather comprehensive evidence, develop multiple response options, and execute a coordinated operation that would neutralize the threat while protecting his own interests. After 35 years of conducting operations against foreign intelligence services, Jim found himself applying those same skills against his own family. Phase 1 involved documenting the conspiracy in detail, using sophisticated surveillance techniques that his stepchildren would never suspect. Jim's security cameras provided video evidence of unauthorized entries and systematic searching of his property, but he also installed miniaturized audio recording devices throughout his house to capture conversations during his stepchildren's visits. The audio surveillance revealed the full scope of their plan, including detailed discussions about their strategy for misrepresenting Jim's behavior, and specific conversations about accessing his wealth through guardianship. Once we have guardianship established, we can liquidate some of his investments to cover our immediate debts, Michael said during one recorded conversation. I've researched the process. Guardians have broad authority to manage assets for the ward's benefit. We need to be careful about timing and amounts, Sarah replied, her social work experience informing their strategy. Too much financial activity too quickly might attract court scrutiny or trigger bank reporting requirements. How much are we talking about? David asked. I owe my bookie $50,000, and they're getting impatient. Jim's got at least $6 million in assets, Jennifer responded. Even if we can only access 20% in the first year, that's over $1 million to split between our debts. The key is documentation, Sarah continued. Everything has to look like legitimate expenses for Jim's care. Home health services, medical equipment, facility modifications. I can provide professional justification for almost any expenditure. The recordings also captured Sarah coaching the others on how to testify during the guardianship hearing, including specific language to use when describing Jim's alleged cognitive decline. Don't say he's confused. Say he shows poor judgment in financial matters. Sarah instructed. Don't say he forgets things, say he demonstrates short-term memory deficits consistent with mild cognitive impairment. Use clinical language that sounds professional. Phase 2 involved researching his stepchildren's backgrounds and vulnerabilities, using intelligence community resources that remained available to Jim through his security clearance and professional networks. Jim's access to government databases and investigation tools gave him capabilities far beyond what civilian investigators could utilize. Jim discovered that Sarah had been previously investigated by the Virginia Board of Social Work for boundary violations in her clinical practice, including inappropriate personal relationships with clients and misuse of confidential medical information. The complaints hadn't resulted in license suspension, but they established a documented pattern of professional misconduct that could be used to challenge her credibility. Michael's real estate license was in jeopardy due to multiple client complaints about misrepresentation of property conditions and failure to disclose known defects. His financial problems were more severe than Jim had realized, including pending bankruptcy proceedings and potential foreclosure on his home. Jennifer's failed consulting business had involved questionable accounting practices and possible tax evasion, with the IRS conducting an ongoing audit of her business expenses. Her debt problems extended beyond business losses to include personal credit card debt and defaulted loans. David's gambling addiction had led him to borrow money from illegal sources, including suspected organized crime figures who were pursuing collection through intimidation and threats. His desperation made him particularly dangerous, but also vulnerable to pressure. Jim realized that his stepchildren were desperate enough to commit serious federal crimes, which made them dangerous adversaries but also provided leverage he could use against them. Phase 3 involved developing a comprehensive response strategy that would expose their fraud while protecting Jim from future attacks. This phase required careful coordination with law enforcement agencies and legal professionals who could handle the case appropriately. Jim contacted Agent Maria Rodriguez, a former CIA colleague who now worked for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Maria had worked with Jim on several international financial crime cases during her intelligence career and understood his professional background and capabilities. "Jim, this is exactly the kind of sophisticated elder abuse we're seeing more frequently," Agent Rodriguez explained during their meeting at a secure government facility. "Family members with professional credentials using their access and knowledge to systematically defraud elderly relatives." "What's the federal interest?" Jim asked. "This seems like a state court guardianship matter." "Several federal crimes are involved," Maria replied. "Mail fraud through court filings, wire fraud if they access your financial accounts electronically, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and potentially healthcare fraud if Sarah uses her professional credentials inappropriately." Jim also contacted Dr. Robert Chen, a former CIA psychological operations specialist who now worked as a private consultant, specializing in elder abuse prevention and family manipulation cases. Dr. Chen could provide expert testimony about the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy and the systematic psychological manipulation being employed. "This isn't opportunistic elder abuse," Dr. Chen explained after reviewing Jim's evidence. "This is a coordinated intelligence operation using family access and professional credentials to systematically deceive a legal system designed to protect vulnerable elderly individuals." But Jim's most powerful resource was his security clearance and continued relationships with intelligence community professionals who could investigate his stepchildren's activities using capabilities unavailable to civilian law enforcement. Through discreet inquiries, Jim learned that Sarah had been involved in at least 3 previous guardianship cases where elderly clients had died shortly after significant asset transfers, raising questions about potential serial elder abuse that had never been investigated. Michael had been associated with several real estate transactions involving elderly sellers who had later claimed they were pressured or deceived into sales, suggesting a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly individuals. Jennifer's business failures had involved partnerships with individuals who were under federal investigation for financial crimes, creating potential connections to organized fraud networks. David's gambling debts were owed to figures connected to money laundering operations, making his involvement in guardianship fraud potentially relevant to ongoing federal investigations. Phase 4 would involve springing a carefully coordinated trap when his stepchildren filed their guardianship petition, revealing not only that Jim was aware of their conspiracy, but that he had been conducting a professional-level counterintelligence operation against them with full federal law enforcement support. The operation would demonstrate that attacking a former CIA officer, even one who appeared to be a vulnerable elderly target, was a mistake that would result in the full weight of the federal government being brought to bear against the conspirators. In March 2024, Michael and Jennifer filed a guardianship petition in Fairfax County Circuit Court, alleging that Jim Anderson was suffering from cognitive decline that made him unable to manage his financial affairs safely. The 47-page petition represented months of careful preparation and included extensive documentation designed to convince the court that Jim was a vulnerable elderly man in need of immediate protection. The petition included Sarah's detailed professional assessment, claiming that Jim showed progressive signs of memory loss, impaired judgment, and social isolation consistent with early-stage dementia. Her clinical social work credentials gave weight to observations that painted Jim as a confused elderly man whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Mr. Anderson frequently appears confused about dates and recent events," Sarah's assessment stated. "During family visits, he has difficulty following complex conversations and demonstrates poor judgment in financial matters. He has become increasingly isolated, declining social invitations, and showing little interest in activities he previously enjoyed. Family members are deeply concerned about his ability to live independently and manage his substantial assets safely." The petition included a timeline of alleged incidents spanning 6 months, each carefully documented to support the narrative of cognitive decline. January 15th. Jim allegedly forgot about a scheduled family dinner and seemed confused when Michael called to check on him. January 28th. Jim reportedly asked Jennifer the same question 3 times during a phone conversation, suggesting short-term memory problems. February 10th. Michael claimed Jim seemed disoriented during a visit, forgetting where he had placed his car keys and appearing agitated when unable to locate them. February 22nd. Sarah documented an incident where Jim allegedly couldn't remember the name of his longtime physician and seemed confused about his medication schedule. March 5th. Jennifer reported that Jim had difficulty following directions to a restaurant they had visited many times before, suggesting spatial memory impairment. The petition requested that Michael Torres be appointed as Jim's guardian, with comprehensive authority to manage all financial affairs, healthcare decisions, and living arrangements. The document emphasized Michael's stable employment, his long-standing relationship with Jim, and his willingness to assume the significant responsibilities of guardianship. Under normal circumstances, Jim would have received notice of the petition and had at least 2 weeks to respond with his own attorney. But the petitioners had arranged for the hearing to be expedited, claiming that Jim's rapidly deteriorating condition created an emergency situation requiring immediate intervention. They had also prepared to argue that Jim's alleged cognitive impairment made him unable to represent himself effectively, requiring the court to appoint an independent attorney who might not aggressively challenge their claims or understand the sophisticated nature of their fraud. "Your Honor, we're requesting emergency temporary guardianship," David Chen argued during the preliminary hearing. Mr. Anderson's condition has deteriorated significantly in recent weeks. His family is concerned that he may make financial decisions that could jeopardize his security and well-being. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for April 15, 2024, with Jim's stepchildren confident that their months of preparation and professional documentation would overwhelm any defense he might mount. But Jim appeared in court with attorney Robert Martinez, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse cases and maintained security clearance for handling sensitive government matters. Martinez had worked extensively with intelligence community personnel and understood the unique challenges of protecting retired government employees from family exploitation. "Your Honor, this case represents something far more sinister than family concern for an elderly relative," Martinez announced during his opening statement. "This is a systematic criminal conspiracy involving professional credentials abuse, home invasion, surveillance, and attempted theft of millions of dollars through fraudulent court proceedings." Jim had also arranged for several surprise witnesses whose testimony would completely demolish his stepchildren's fraud case. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, a neuropsychologist with expertise in cognitive assessment and security clearance for evaluating government personnel, had conducted a comprehensive evaluation of Jim's mental status using standardized testing protocols that exceeded typical guardianship assessments. Mr. Anderson underwent 6 hours of comprehensive cognitive testing using protocols designed for high-functioning individuals with demanding careers, Dr. Martinez testified. He scored in the 95th percentile for his age group across all cognitive domains, including memory, attention, executive function, and problem-solving abilities. His performance was not only normal, but exceptional. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, does Mr. Anderson show any signs of cognitive impairment?" Attorney Martinez asked. "None whatsoever. In fact, his cognitive abilities are superior to most individuals his age and comparable to professionals in demanding intellectual careers. Any suggestion that he lacks capacity to manage his affairs is completely unsupported by objective evidence." FBI agent Maria Rodriguez testified about the ongoing federal investigation into the guardianship fraud, presenting evidence that transformed the hearing from a routine guardianship proceeding into an exposure of federal crimes. Mr. Anderson provided extensive video and audio evidence of his stepchildren planning to defraud him through false guardianship claims, Agent Rodriguez told the court. "Our investigation has documented unauthorized entry into his home, systematic theft of private information, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and preparation of fraudulent court documents." Agent Rodriguez presented audio recordings of the conspirators discussing their plans, including Sarah's coaching sessions on how to misrepresent normal behavior as cognitive impairment. The defendants can be heard on tape discussing how to liquidate his investments to cover our debts and how to provide professional justification for almost any expenditure, Agent Rodriguez testified. "This is not family concern. This is premeditated financial exploitation." But Jim's most devastating witness was Colonel Patricia Williams, Ret., his former CIA supervisor who could speak generally about Jim's professional background and capabilities without revealing classified operational details. Mr. Anderson spent 35 years conducting complex intelligence operations requiring the highest levels of mental acuity, decision-making capability, and operational security, Colonel Williams testified. His work involved analyzing complex international situations, managing dangerous operations, and making critical decisions under extreme pressure. Colonel Williams, what level of cognitive function would be required for someone to successfully complete 35 years of intelligence work? Attorney Martinez asked. The cognitive demands are extraordinary. Intelligence officers must process complex information rapidly, detect deception, anticipate adversaries' actions, and execute sophisticated plans under hostile conditions. Someone with any cognitive impairment would be immediately identified and removed from operational duties. The colonel's testimony revealed that Jim Anderson wasn't just a competent elderly man, he was a highly trained intelligence professional whose mental abilities far exceeded those of ordinary individuals his age, making claims of cognitive decline not just false, but laughably implausible. Judge Patricia Chen reviewed the evidence with growing anger at the sophisticated deception that had been attempted in her courtroom. This court has been presented with what appears to be a carefully orchestrated fraud designed to exploit both Mr. Anderson and the legal system intended to protect vulnerable elderly individuals, Judge Chen stated. The evidence demonstrates not only that Mr. Anderson possesses exceptional cognitive abilities, but that the petitioners have engaged in systematic criminal activity to support their false claims. The judge's ruling would have consequences far beyond the failed guardianship petition, triggering federal prosecutions that would destroy the conspirators' lives and careers while establishing important legal precedents for protecting elderly Americans from sophisticated family fraud schemes. Judge Patricia Chen's ruling on the guardianship petition was comprehensive and devastating for the conspirators. After reviewing the extensive evidence presented by both sides, she not only denied the petition with prejudice, but issued findings that would support federal criminal prosecutions and professional sanctions. This court finds that the guardianship petition filed against James Anderson was not only frivolous but constituted an elaborate criminal conspiracy to defraud an elderly citizen of his assets and civil liberties through systematic abuse of legal processes. Judge Chen stated from the bench, "The evidence presented demonstrates that Mr. Anderson is not only mentally competent but possesses cognitive abilities superior to most individuals his age, including abilities honed through decades of demanding government service requiring exceptional mental acuity." Judge Chen specifically addressed each conspirator's role in the fraud. Michael Torres, as the proposed guardian, organized and coordinated this conspiracy while maintaining access to Mr. Anderson's home through family relationships. His conduct represents a profound violation of family trust and fiduciary responsibility. Jennifer Chen participated in systematic intelligence gathering about Mr. Anderson's personal affairs and financial assets, contributing to a conspiracy designed to steal millions of dollars through legal manipulation. David Chen provided legal research and documentation support for fraudulent court filings, demonstrating knowledge that their claims were false while proceeding with criminal activity. But Judge Chen reserved her harshest criticism for Sarah Torres, whose professional credentials had been central to the conspiracy's credibility. The court is particularly disturbed by the conduct of Sarah Torres, a licensed clinical social worker who systematically abused her professional credentials to provide false assessment of Mr. Anderson's mental status, Judge Chen continued. Ms. Torres used her clinical training and professional authority to create fraudulent documentation designed to deceive this court and violate Mr. Anderson's constitutional rights. This conduct represents not only criminal fraud but a fundamental violation of professional ethics and public trust. Ms. Torres has demonstrated that she is willing to abuse her professional authority for personal financial gain, making her unfit to continue practicing social work. Judge Chen ordered immediate referral to the Virginia Board of Social Work for emergency license suspension proceedings against Sarah, citing imminent danger to other elderly clients who might be targeted for similar exploitation. The judge also ordered referral to federal authorities for investigation of multiple federal crimes, including conspiracy to commit elder abuse, mail fraud through false court filings, wire fraud involving electronic transmission of fraudulent financial information, and healthcare fraud through abuse of professional credentials. This case demonstrates the vulnerability of legal systems designed to protect elderly citizens when those systems are systematically abused by individuals with specialized knowledge and family access, Judge Chen observed. The court will recommend that federal authorities investigate whether similar schemes have been perpetrated against other elderly victims. All four conspirators were ordered to pay Jim's legal costs, estimated at over $150,000, and were permanently banned from filing any future guardianship or conservatorship petitions in Virginia courts. But Judge Chen's ruling was just the beginning of the consequences Jim's stepchildren would face as federal prosecutors built cases that would result in decades of prison time and complete destruction of their professional lives. The FBI's investigation into the guardianship fraud expanded rapidly once Agent Rodriguez reviewed the extensive evidence Jim had gathered. The case involved multiple federal crimes and revealed a level of sophistication that suggested the conspirators might have targeted other elderly victims. Federal charges were filed against all four conspirators: Michael Torres, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, mail fraud, using postal service to file false court documents, and wire fraud, electronic transmission of fraudulent financial information. Sarah Torres, healthcare fraud, misusing professional credentials, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, mail fraud, and violation of federal patient privacy laws. Jennifer Chen, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, identity theft, accessing Jim's financial information without authorization, and mail fraud. David Chen, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, mail fraud, and attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person. The investigation also revealed that Sarah had been conducting similar assessments of other elderly clients in her social work practice, potentially identifying additional victims for guardianship fraud schemes. This case represents a new level of sophistication in elder abuse, Agent Rodriguez announced. The conspirators used professional credentials, family relationships, and knowledge of legal systems to target a victim they believed was vulnerable. But Agent Rodriguez also noted that Jim's background had given him unique advantages in detecting and responding to the fraud. Mr. Anderson's professional experience in intelligence gathering and analysis allowed him to recognize the surveillance and documentation activities that preceded the fraudulent guardianship petition. Most elderly victims don't have these specialized skills to protect themselves. The federal case attracted attention from elder abuse prevention organizations and law enforcement agencies across the country, who used Jim's systematic documentation methods as a model for training other potential victims. The criminal charges against Jim's stepchildren were accompanied by professional and civil consequences that would permanently destroy their careers and financial stability. Sarah Torres faced immediate suspension of her clinical social work license pending investigation by the Virginia Board of Social Work. The board's investigation revealed a pattern of boundary violations and misuse of professional authority that extended beyond the guardianship fraud. Ms. Torres used her position as a licensed clinical social worker to gain access to confidential medical information and to provide false professional assessments, the board's findings stated. This conduct represents a fundamental violation of social work ethics and public trust. Sarah's license was permanently revoked, ending her 15-year career in social work and eliminating her primary source of income. Michael Torres's real estate license was suspended by the Virginia Real Estate Board after his arrest for elder abuse fraud. The board determined that criminal charges involving fraud and deception made him unfit to represent clients in real estate transactions. Jennifer Chen's consulting business, already struggling with debt and poor reputation, collapsed completely when news of her involvement in elder abuse fraud became public. Her professional network abandoned her, and potential clients refused to work with someone facing federal criminal charges. David Chen's gambling addiction and criminal charges made him unemployable in most professional settings, particularly those requiring financial responsibility or trust. But the civil consequences were even more severe than the professional sanctions. Jim's civil lawsuit against his stepchildren sought damages for emotional distress, invasion of privacy, conspiracy, and attempted theft of assets. The lawsuit was filed in federal court and included claims under both state and federal elder abuse statutes. Jim's attorney, David Chen, presented evidence that the conspiracy had caused significant emotional trauma and had required extensive security measures and legal costs to defend against. Mr. Anderson was forced to install surveillance equipment in his own home, hire private security consultants, and undergo extensive legal proceedings to protect himself from his own stepchildren, Attorney Chen told the court. The civil case also revealed the full extent of the financial losses Jim's stepchildren had intended to cause. Their plan would have given them control over Jim's entire $6.4 million estate, with the ability to liquidate assets under the guise of paying for his care. Expert testimony showed that guardianship abuse typically results in rapid depletion of elderly victims' assets, with guardians using their legal authority to transfer wealth to themselves, while claiming the expenditures are necessary for the victim's welfare. Mr. Anderson would have lost his home, his investments, and his independence, testified Dr. Patricia Williams, an expert in guardianship abuse. The conspirators' plan would have rendered him financially dependent, while they systematically stole his life savings. The federal jury awarded Jim $3.2 million in compensatory and punitive damages, finding that the conspiracy represented an egregious violation of family trust and elder rights. But collecting the judgment would prove impossible, because Jim's stepchildren had already lost most of their assets to legal costs, professional sanctions, and bankruptcy. Jim's case became a landmark example within the intelligence community of how professional skills could be applied to personal security challenges. The CIA used Jim's experience as a training case for retiring officers, demonstrating how tradecraft skills remained valuable for protecting against civilian threats. Mr. Anderson's case shows that the same analytical and operational skills we use professionally can be essential for personal protection, explained Colonel Williams during a CIA retirement seminar. Surveillance detection, evidence gathering, and strategic planning are just as important for defending against family fraud as they are for protecting national security. Jim was invited to speak at federal law enforcement conferences about his systematic approach to detecting and documenting elder abuse. His methods were incorporated into FBI training materials for financial crimes investigators. Most elderly victims don't have Mr. Anderson's specialized background, Agent Rodriguez noted, but his techniques for recognizing suspicious behavior and documenting evidence can be adapted for use by ordinary citizens. Jim also worked with elder abuse prevention organizations to develop security protocols for vulnerable elderly individuals. His recommendations included surveillance detection techniques, document security measures, and communication protocols that could help potential victims protect themselves. The case attracted international attention from intelligence services and law enforcement agencies interested in Jim's systematic approach to personal counterintelligence. This case demonstrates that intelligence tradecraft has applications far beyond national security, said Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who studied intelligence methodology at Georgetown University. Mr. Anderson's experience shows how professional skills can be repurposed for civilian protection. The criminal trial of Jim's stepchildren concluded with convictions on all federal charges. The sophisticated nature of their conspiracy and the vulnerability of their intended victim resulted in substantial prison sentences. Michael Torres was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. His leadership role in organizing the Guardianship petition and his use of family relationships to gain access to Jim's home resulted in enhanced penalties. Sarah Torres received a 10-year sentence, with additional penalties for misusing her professional credentials and violating patient privacy laws. The judge noted that her abuse of social work authority represented a particularly serious violation of public trust. Jennifer Chen was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for conspiracy and identity theft. Her role in researching Jim's financial assets and planning the asset seizure demonstrated clear criminal intent. David Chen received a 5-year sentence for conspiracy and attempted financial exploitation. His gambling addiction was considered a mitigating factor, but his participation in planning the fraud warranted substantial punishment. The sentences sent a strong message to other potential elder abuse conspirators that sophisticated schemes targeting vulnerable elderly victims would face severe federal consequences. Jim attended the sentencing hearings but chose not to provide victim impact statements. Their actions speak for themselves, he told reporters outside the courthouse. The justice system has held them accountable. Today, James Anderson lives in his Alexandria home with enhanced security measures, but the same quiet dignity that characterized his intelligence career. His experience has become a model for elder abuse prevention and has helped protect countless other elderly Americans from similar family betrayal schemes. The stepchildren who thought they were targeting a helpless elderly man are serving federal prison sentences totaling 29 years. The $6.4 million they tried to steal through guardianship fraud has grown to over $8 million through careful investment and continued government benefits. Jim's systematic approach to detecting and documenting the conspiracy has been adopted by elder abuse prevention organizations across the United States. His techniques for surveillance detection and evidence gathering have prevented dozens of similar guardianship fraud attempts. The intelligence skills I developed during my CIA career proved just as valuable for protecting my personal security as they were for protecting national security, Jim reflected during a recent conference presentation. Tradecraft doesn't retire when the officer does. Jim's case established important legal precedents for prosecuting sophisticated elder abuse schemes and demonstrated that family relationships provide no protection for criminals who target elderly relatives. The former CIA operative who spent 35 years protecting American interests abroad used those same skills to protect himself from domestic threats. His stepchildren learned that underestimating a trained intelligence professional was a mistake with permanent consequences. My career taught me that the best defense is superior intelligence gathering and strategic planning, Jim told a Georgetown University class studying intelligence methodology. Those principles apply whether you're facing foreign adversaries or family members with criminal intentions. Jim's security clearance remains active, and he occasionally consults with government agencies on elder protection and family security issues. His expertise in counterintelligence has found new purpose in defending vulnerable elderly Americans against increasingly sophisticated family fraud schemes. The guardianship petition that was supposed to render Jim helpless instead revealed the full extent of his professional capabilities and resulted in federal prosecution of the conspirators. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, professional skills and systematic preparation can protect against even sophisticated family betrayal schemes.